Hello, powerful people. Welcome back to the Power at Work blog. My name is Seth Harris, and I'm a senior fellow at the Burns Center for Social Change at Northeastern University. Delighted to have you here. If this is your first time visiting the blog, what have you been waiting for? I mean, honestly, what have you been waiting for? I mean, this is the third of three Labor Day blogcasts that we've presented. The first one was an interview with the National Labor Relations Board's General Counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo. The second was with the president of the AFL-CIO, Liz Schuler. A terrific interview, both of them terrific interviews. So you should have watched those. If you haven't watched those, after you're done watching this one, go over to the blog and watch both of those interviews, in addition to the other great content that we have. But those two interviews, you gotta watch those newsmaking interviews. And today we have the third Labor Day blogcast that the Power at Work blog is presenting. And we're going to introduce you to, although you probably already know her, but we're gonna interview the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten. I've had the privilege of knowing President Weingarten for a very, very long time. During my early days in the labor movement, I met her, and she was an important voice in advising me about how to proceed. She's the president. I mean, you could sum it up this way. She's the president of the largest union in the AFL-CIO. The AFT has 1.7 million members. They're the biggest. They represent teachers. They represent higher ed faculty. They represent paraprofessionals. They represent nurses and other workers in the healthcare industry. They represent early childhood educators. So they're an education union, they're a healthcare union, but they're a lot more than that. They represent state and local government employees of varying kinds around the country. So a very, very important union, and President Weingarten, one of the most important voices in the labor movement and in our society, both for public education and for worker organizing and for democracy. You're going to hear us talk a good bit about that. Prior to becoming president of the American Federation of Teachers, President Weingarten was the president of the United Federation of Teachers, which is the New York City local of the American Federation of Teachers, Local 2, representing about 200,000 public school teachers and others in New York City. And she was the head of the Municipal Labor Council, which is the federation, you might say, of all of the public employee unions in New York City, which is a gigantic federation, as you might imagine. Prior to being the president of the UFT, President Weingarten was counsel to the then president of the UFT, Sandra Feldman, who went on to become the president of the AFT as well. And very close to my heart, President Weingarten was a history teacher at Clara Barton High School in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. It's close to my heart because my dad was a public school history teacher and also an AFT member. One of the things that brought President Weingarten and me together as friends a long time ago. When my dad started teaching, it was in the very early days of teacher trade unionism around the country. And he was earning the princely sum of $6,600. And that's what we were living off because my mom was taking care of my brother and me. We were both very young when he started teaching. I was born in the year he started teaching. But my mom later became a public school teacher. And let me just say, because of the union, in New York State, the union is NYSUT, the New York State United Teachers. That's the affiliate of the American Federation of Teachers in New York State and sort of the parent of the United Federation of Teachers. But because of that union, we lived a good, solid middle-class life. We were able to sustain a solid middle-class existence on two public school teacher salaries, which is as it should be. But my parents earned a reasonable wage. They didn't get rich, but they earned a reasonable wage. They were treated as professionals. They had tenure, and so they were able to be creative for their students. My dad created new courses. My mom created all kinds of lesson plans. As a library media specialist at Herrick's High School, my dad taught at Schreiber High School. And very important for my mom, who lived to the ripe old age of 94, she had a pension. And that was a pension that sustained her in her retirement in dignity. and was able to leave my brother and me a little bit of money when she passed. So, like a lot of children of trade unionists around the United States, I can say absolutely that the AFT created the foundation for everything that my brother and I had today. I mean, it's just true. We lived a solid middle class life. We were able to have solid middle class lives. We were able to do the kinds of things we did. My brother and I were able to do the kinds of things we did professionally because we knew that we had the economic stability of good union jobs. And so when we say good union jobs, that's what we're talking about. So I'm really eager for you to hear this interview. Let me just say one thing. I believe for the first time ever on a Power at Work blogcast, a curse word is uttered. So for those of you who are sensitive to those kinds of things, or if you have small children watching this with you, and you should, because President Weingarten is a teacher after all, but if either of those things are true and you don't like hearing curse words, this may not be the blogcast for you. I want to give you a little warning. This is a PG-13 blogcast. There's just one. It happens once. It happens quickly. You're not even going to notice it. You write to me and let me know if you even notice it. You probably won't notice it, but it's a fantastic discussion about unions, about democracy, about organizing, about education, about the assault on education, about the assault on Randi Weingarten, about the assault on teachers' unions, and about the future. And we even talked a little bit about Ukraine. So I'm eager to have you watch that. I often use this space to talk about the latest news. The current news in the labor world, the biggest news, of course, is the negotiations between the UAW and the Big Three. I will be talking about that in a couple of television interviews this week. If I do a good job, and it's even money that I do a good job, we'll post the video of those television interviews on the blog. So I won't take up your time here. You can just watch those interviews if you want to know what I'm thinking and my assessment of what's going on with the UAW and the Big Three. Do want to say, however, the writers and actors strikes still going on in Hollywood don't seem to be making any progress on negotiations there. Shame on the studios. They should be doing better. They're doing terribly. They've mismanaged the situation completely. So that's enough of that distraction. I want to get you right to the interview with the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten. Enjoy. So I want to start by thanking you for allowing your back to school tour to intersect with our Labor Day blogcast series and joining us on the Power at Work blog. I'm really
Love
grateful. Bringing the back to school tour to your, are you at home? Are you in the office? I actually don't even know.
Today, because I am doing stuff in New York this afternoon, I am at home in New York. I've lived in New York. I tried to live in Washington, Seth, but I couldn't. So I moved back to the ancestral home, and I've been living in New York for ever. So I'm here, and the teachers have started back for professional development in New York yesterday, and I saw all sorts of moving and the signs of September early this morning, and was really it's as some teachers said to me on Facebook yesterday, it is like the most exciting time in his life back to school, and I love that about teachers.
Yeah. That's how my parents felt about it. Labor Day weekend going into the start of school, they really got excited. They were a little nervous about it because it's, you're going to perform again for the first time in 3 months. So
yeah,
a little bit. So I want to talk about organizing, and I want to highlight some news that you know very well about the AFT, but that our audience may not. And that is that last month, your union announced its 50th organizing victory of the year. It was a unit of respiratory therapists at Ohio State University's Wexner Medical Center. You've now added 8,000 new members through organizing to the AFT.
Right.
And here I want you to correct me if I've got this wrong. The AFT is now the largest union in the AFL-CIO. You have 1.72 million members. There are other unions outside the AFL-CIO that are about that size or bigger. But is the AFT now the largest union in the AFL?
Yes, we are. Look, the largest two unions in the AFL, show the difference of what has happened in the labor movement, which is AFT and then ASME, then UFCW. But what's happening, I think, is think about the split screen. But let me take a step back, which is for working people and you're seeing I'm wearing my shirt, it's better in a union, which is the AFL-CIO's narrative for this year, which I think is absolutely right. But if you're a working person, the way you have power is through knowledge, public education. And yes, college is too expensive right now, but public higher education, public education. The way you have economic power ultimately is through a union, through collective bargaining, and through having a voice at work. And the way you have the way you have political power, or to make those two things work for regular folks, is through voting. And so, we as the AFT, we stand at the cross section of all three of these things, of how we help families have some power and agency in their life so that they can claim opportunity and they can dream their dreams and achieve them. And so I've always kind of liked that back to school and Labor Day are around the same time. Lots of schools start actually a couple of weeks before Labor Day these days because of the heat issues. But that's who we are. And so ultimately, just like what the garment workers did when we were founded, like the IBW has done, like the coal miners did during John Lewis's time, it's part of our obligation to help organize the unorganized and help other unions now in the private sector, just like the private sector did for us when we were starting. It's now for us to help the private sector create organization. And we do this, let me just say one more thing. We do this
No, go ahead.
At a time when, labor is cool again, but at a time that we've had to deal with a 60-year, not just GOP assault, but a 60-year assault on the labor movement and on rights through organization at the job. And so to have 1.72 million members right now, when DeSantis is trying to, crash and burn our membership, when we're seeing that in other places where the GOP extremists have trifectas, it's pretty remarkable that we are growing and organizing as they are trying to attack and decimate our members. And
absolutely. So where are you? I just wanted to ask, where are you focusing? Where is the AFT focusing its organizing?
Mm-hmm.
Is it primarily healthcare? Is it primarily in higher ed? Is it in K through 12? Is there room for organizing growth in K through 12? What's the AFT's strategy for growth through organizing?
Well, the AFT, first one has to know that the AFT is, yes, a teachers union, but it's a union of professionals that make a difference in the lives of others. So over the course of the last 20 years, we've now become the second largest nurse union, and we're the fastest growing healthcare union. And we're now, because of the alliance and the affiliation with AUP, we are now the dominant higher ed union in the country. And so it is all of this. It's public services like libraries, it's charter schools. We have about 300 charter schools that we have organized now. It is some private schools.
I thought the whole idea of charter schools was to not have unions, right? Or isn't that what the people who originated the charter school movement were trying to do, was to set up non-union schools sort of as competitors and work those teachers?
So the people who actually started charter schools were people like Al Shanker. I still run one in New York City in the Bronx that does incredibly well. The graduation rates, others are really it's called UniPrep. It does incredibly well. And it is one that has joint labor management that helps run the school and listen to the voices of teachers. And it's an untimed day, and people get paid about 10% more, 15% more than they do in New York City public schools. And it's something that we did years ago, and it's still working. I mean, but Shanker was actually the first one who had the idea for charter schools, and it was about public school choice and finding ways to get out of the yoke of bureaucracy and doing something different before you brought it to a whole system. What happened was that the charter movement was then hijacked by gazillionaires who decided that teachers having a voice was the problem in education, as opposed to teachers having a voice would advance education. Like, how do you do something so labor intensive for children and take the people who are doing it and trying to make them into automatons? So it was hijacked by the Eva Moskowitz crew, by the private equity crew. But what's happening is in the charter movement is that people who've decided to stay in schools and make it their career, what a shock. They want health benefits. They want retirement security. They want fairness. They want wages that keep up with at least the inflation. Teaching is a real job. Yes, it's a calling. And yes, you need to love kids to teach, and you need to be good-hearted and have a lot of patience. But it is not one where you have made have said that you are going to take a pledge of poverty. It's a
Right.
middle class job, and just like other middle class jobs, that's what a union movement does. So our organizing is, I would actually say, spoiler alert, all of the right wing demagoguery on us have made us incredibly popular with workers, because think about what happened and you can see the organizing from this. Okay, when they ban books, we teachers, the union, we give out books of diverse titles. We have people's backs. We have our community's backs. When they actually
I saw you say that you handed out the union has handed out 9 million books on the way to handing out 10 million books. That is a lot of books. Where are you doing it? How are you doing it?
So we have a program, and anybody who wants to come to our website, please do. We have a program which we called Reading Opens the World. And what we try to do is work with communities and our locals all across the country. We had about 250 events last year. 250 events last year. And, we do years from basically July to July. So maybe it was 14 months, 15 months. But what those events are is book fairs with bouncy houses in places, with with kids dancing and choral numbers, and work with the PTAs or other parent groups, where we bring a community together. We have lots of different rooms and lots of different, so one room has the Star Trek books, or one room has the Disney books, and one room has the books in Spanish, and one room is really focused on, or sometimes they're outside. One table is really focused on pre-K. But what you see in all of our book distribution, and sometimes it's 40,000 books, sometimes it's 5,000, sometimes it's 10,000, what you see is that we really try to have books that kids see themselves in and parents see themselves in. And then we do book tips and all this other stuff. 250 events last year. My favorite one was in Cleveland. It was the day of a Cleveland Browns game, but we had a book fair earlier in the day. And the mayor was there, and our union was there, and it was and we had all sorts of different games in the huge field house. And that, and it just made Christmas for people. My second favorite was doing this work with the NAACP kids in Florida. And what's happening is, as they're banning books in schools, the NAACP and we the kids are basically having Saturday events or Sunday events or evening events where they call them emancipation libraries. And so
Beautiful.
as DeSantis is banning books and people are scared, these kids are standing up and saying, "Oh no, we don't want you taking our knowledge away." And parents and kids and us together, that's the community, that's the bubble up community that King
Yeah.
talked about. So
Let's
all
so
I'm
let's
saying
I
is
Go
it's
ahead.
just a matter of when you stand up, people see it. In healthcare, we're standing up for safe staffing. People see it. When you get to a good contract like we had in Bend, Oregon, people see it. And so they say, I want a part of that. And so we now have more people asking to join the AFT than we have organizers. But what
Mm.
we insist on is that there has to be a committee in the community, in the shop that wants to organize. That's what we insist on. We are not doing this top down. We are supporting bottom up, grassroots based organizing for a better life.
That's the only way it can really work. I want to pick up on the politics that has made your book distribution programs, your emancipation libraries, which I love that idea. The politics that's made that necessary. As a former AP history teacher like my dad, you know perfectly well that schools have been political lightning rods really ever since the era when secondary education was made compulsory. A lot of people don't like to pay taxes to support schools. Racial segregation, of course, was devastating to public education in a lot of communities, not just in the old Confederacy. Sex discrimination and sex harassment have been issues for many years, and book banning is not new; it's revived. But that's the question I want to ask you: is there something different going on in the political discussion about schools this time? Is there something different in Florida now, in Texas now, in Arkansas now, and in some other states? And is there something that we can do to modulate this new politicization of schools by folks on the right?
Yes, there is something different. And yes, we can do things. It's important to understand it. And it's also important to understand that most parents are not buying it. They understand who their teachers are to their kids, and 90% of America still sends their kids to public schools. What is motivating and undergirding this antipathy, which is by a small group of people, a small group of extremists that are basically relying on or exacerbating or the anxiety that people had post-COVID. But what the core is, and you know this as well as I do, what Betsy DeVos, what Milton Friedman, what the billionaire conservative class that never wanted public education, the same kind of roots that happened in the aftermath of Brown v. Board, those same words that you heard in terms of wanting segregation post Brown v. Board of Education, those same words you hear today. It's not, I was kind of gobsmacked when I was talking to Southern Poverty Law Center, and they showed me the same words: choice, parental rights, and attempt to divide parents versus teachers. And that point, it was white parents versus other parents. But it's the same kind of words. But the goal is, if you listen to DeVos, if you listen to a Christopher Rufo, if you listen to the guy Ferris, who has brought a lot of these cases, some alliance that it's called that has democracy and freedom in the words. If you listen to them, what they really want is the end of public education as we know it. So they really want universal vouchers. So a Rufo will say, we need to create universal public school distrust to get to universal vouchers. Others want it because they hate knowledge, or they fear broad-based knowledge. Remember what Trump said? He liked the ignorant people. And some want it because they see that that what they want. I mean, look at what DeVos said about they want um, they want to have basically a Christian ideology. Their particular Christian ideology dominate the country, as opposed to a country that was born on the freedom of the exercise of religion. And I say this as a very proud Jew who is married to a rabbi and really relies on, and is very religious, but really relies on that free exercise of religion and the separation of church and state. So, you got lots of reasons why these extremists have come together, but they really want universal vouchers and the end of public education as we know it. And so now this is what made it different. Look at the politics. The politics in the country are really different. The division is really different. The enabling of hate, the normalizing of hate, so that you don't have the modulation of saying, really, you're going to do this to our kids? And then the second thing that's different is we just got through, I mean, COVID is rising again, but we essentially got through a pandemic of proportions that no one in modern America understood and understood how to deal with. And so schools were closed for, in my judgment, too long. There was huge distrust and conspiracy theories up and down the wazoo, which meant people were more fearful. And so what people did was they used the fact that kids were not okay after this long period of disconnection, and they decided to blame schools and blame teachers and blame teacher unions and blame me. The irony here is that, I'm not shy about things. And we, from April 2020, we're trying to reopen schools. I mean, I had a lot of people within my own union saying, what are you doing? We were trying to reopen schools and address the fear and address the safety issues. What we had understood is if we could get to layered mitigation, if we could do what Europe was doing, which was putting school kids first as a priority, not bars and restaurants, if we could create some consistent policy of safety and layered mitigation, we could reopen schools safely. And so I was out there all the time from April on talking about that. And when somebody wasn't doing safety, I was saying you have to do it safely, because Trump was like, oh, just open schools. Who cares about those teachers? And so you just so that was the tip of the spear. And then it was mass, and then it was CRT, and then it was trans kids. So they just threw. So this is the most important thing I could say on this. They just threw spaghetti on the wall, and whatever created fear or a sense of division, that's what you saw on Newsmax. That's what you saw on Fox. That's what all of a sudden Moms for Liberty did. That's what DeSantis did. And on and on. It's changing. It's shifting. But I would argue it has really hurt kids, because what we need right now is a stable, welcoming, and safe environment for kids. If we're going to deal with loneliness, if we're going to deal with learning loss, if we're going to get kids' mojo back, we got to create a safe, welcoming environment. And that's what we're trying to do. And that's our Real Solutions campaign right now. But the pitched battles by a small minority, by a small group of extremists, then exacerbated by these extreme governors or superintendents of school, like the guy in Oklahoma City, or not Oklahoma City, or or DeSantis. It hurts children and it undermines knowledge.
So I want to step back from what you just described, which is very real. And can I just say, is there anything more disgusting than picking on a kid, particularly a trans kid who's already facing all kinds of societal pressures, family pressures, religious pressures, beating up on
No,
a trans kid, beating up on a black kid, and telling them the history they've learned is not right. But I want to step back.
no,
You have,
there's nothing more disgusting than that. And this is what's so remarkable to me. The people who are doing it say they care about kids, but whose kids do they care about? Do they care about
yeah,
all
that's the
kids?
thing.
I mean, when they do this, they don't care about all kids. When they take books out of a library, Amanda Gorman's book, really? You take her poem at an elementary school library? What about a black kid who says, "Look at that poet. Look, I want to be like that." So what you're doing is you're basically making a choice about whose kids are valuable and whose are not, and that is dead wrong. If you care about kids, you got to care about all kids.
Right, so let's talk about all kids, because you're
Sorry.
one of the no.
I'm
I know, I
so
definitely
angry
want to do it,
about this.
and one of the reasons I love you is because you're so passionate about an issue that I care about very deeply. Child of teachers, teacher myself, I get it, and I appreciate your passion so much. But you're one of the few people who has a perspective on the entire education system in our, most people are focused on their communities, or they're focused on their states. You and the Secretary of Education and Becky Pringle at the NEA and a few others look at the whole picture. So we have these really extreme things going on in some parts of the country, but what's your sense of the state of America's public schools today? As you said, 90% of American parents are sending their kids to public schools. Is it a healthy system? Is it a failing system? Is it a struggling system? Is it an improving system? How would you characterize where public schools are in America today?
Well, I would characterize it as vital and fragile. But first off, we're not Europe. We don't have one unitary school system across 50 states and Puerto Rico and the other territories. We have basically every state and every territory, look at DC, has a separate school system with separate lay leadership. And that is the way America created this. And much of it is funded by property taxes, which in and of itself is inequitable and in so many different ways. So it is built on lots of local control and local autonomy with a value system that says knowledge really matters. And so, I can go through a long history about what was the federal role. First, before Johnson, there was no federal role. So the federal role really started in the 1960s, in the 1950s, in the aftermath of Brown versus Board of Education and civil rights law. The federal role was really a civil rights role. And then it became a role in No Child Left Behind and other places with Title I and other things. I'm throwing a lot of alphabet soup out there. But what I'm saying is, over the course of the last 50, 60 years, the federal role has been one that was about lifting up standards, finding resources to help the most vulnerable. IDEA, special needs kids, Title I, kids who are poor and disproportionately Black and brown. All of this came, just like Medicare and Medicaid, as part of the Johnson's Great Revolution and Kennedy's Great Revolution,
Great,
the
Great Society and
Great
New
Society.
Frontier.
Sorry, the New Frontier, the Great Society after the New Deal. So all of this came as a way of trying to lift opportunity. And the civil rights pieces were part of that. So the national level is really, it's not just symbolic, but it is not the day-to-day that happens on the local levels. And what has happened, unfortunately, after No Child Left Behind, is that testing became the norm after No Child Left Behind, as opposed to innovation. Before No Child Left Behind in the 60s and the 70s, and Linda Darling Hammond is fantastic at this. She talks about this all the time. We didn't have enough money, but there was lots of innovation. And there was lots of ways that one system would look at another system and say, let's lift up. When it became about the test, what happened was the test became the fixation, not the child. And so on top of that, look what happened, fast forward to COVID. Schools were incredibly innovative. Nobody had, okay, this is a standard operating procedure you do if you have a pandemic that closes schools within 72 hours. So look what teachers did. Look how they MacGyvered things. Look how when they were left to their own devices, and look what parents said about them. And so part of this is we need the funding to give, but we also need to give teachers agency to be able to meet the needs of kids. And so when I say we're fragile, if I take all of the time that we have to fight stupid shit, including the defunding of school, and we could take all that time to really invest in the things that works and the strategies that work to seed, sustain, and scale, we would be in much better shape. That is what Finland did, which is why Finland became tops in the country, in the world. It focused on what kids needed, both emotionally and academically, socially and academically, and then made school interesting and joyful. And kids then found their passion and their pursuits. And what a shock. When kids find their passions and pursuits, they do well in school and they want to come to school. So what we're trying to do right now is say, what are the things that really matter? We got to deal with loneliness. We got to deal with learning loss. And it starts with literacy. So that's why our strategies right now, our solutions are to take community schools, wrap services around, really deal with the issues of loneliness, take on the social media companies with parents to really deal with what devices do and social media platforms do to make kids more lonely. So let's stop that, but let's also do the social emotional work we have to do. But second, and equally important, why don't we do something really, really, really shocking? Why don't we make schools fun for kids? Why don't we create practical skills? Why don't we actually really not just give lip service to career, but do what we do in the best career tech ed schools and have career paths that start in high school where kids could get credentials so they could go to college, or they could go into Microsoft, or they could go into welding, or they could do auto mechanics, or they could do culinary. And so why don't we make high schools much more vibrant places and make performance on these skills, experiential learning, hands-on learning, debate in AP? Why don't we make that the test as opposed to test scores? So when I say people want public schools, but they want them to work for kids, they need them to work for kids, and that becomes, how do we prepare kids for life, for career, for college, not to take a test. And so that's why it's fragile, but it's important.
Right. So I want to let me pick up on that point, because you taught in a CTE high school in New York. So this relationship between education and work, I know, is something that you spend a lot of time thinking about and advocating on behalf of. We just heard a little bit of that. I want to talk about that in the education space, because there are discussions underway right now where the hope is that the union or the unions might start sponsoring apprenticeship models for teacher training, not just for teachers in the K through 12 sector, but early childhood education, and other places where you are training educators. And we already have even back when I was a kid, you'd have a student aide in the classroom who was learning how to be a teacher's aide, who was learning how to be a teacher. What's your sense of the applicability of the apprenticeship model, which has been amazingly successful in some industries, but really has not proliferated in the U.S., for education, but also for some of the other industries in which you represent workers, higher ed, and to some extent, to maybe a greater extent, healthcare? Is that something that's worth exploring, or it's not, or it just doesn't work?
Look, of course it's worth exploring, but I think we have the wrong nomenclature for it. I
Okay.
don't think we should be calling it apprenticeship models. I think we should be calling it, and I had this conversation with Marty Walsh. I completely understand why the former Secretary of Education would call it that. I completely understand why the White House calls it that. Because it's like it's a really great model in the construction trades, and it can be a great model in other places. But we have a patchwork already, which is to become a school teacher, you have to get credits in college, and most of those colleges are here already. So the key is, how do you align to make things better? How do you align it? So, for example, what I'm talking about, and frankly, you're right, I taught in CTE school, and one of the reasons I'm so passionate about it is fought we fought to keep these CTE schools, because when I taught in the 90s, it was college, 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 college. I taught AP history in a career tech ed school. Of course, college is vitally important, but 60% of our kids, after we've talked about college, college, college for so long, 60% of our kids don't go to college. So what are we doing for high school students who need to see a panoply of opportunities for themselves? And at that point in time, people like Joel Klein in New York City and Michelle Rhee in DC, they just wanted to basically decimate career tech ed schools. So in many places, we're starting from scratch again, and we're starting with a really bad stigma about them. And so let me just say, 94% of kids who go to CTE programs graduate from high school, and 70% of them go to college. We should be giving kids more choices. So I think about this as pathways. Let me talk about the teachers in a second and nurses in a second, but let's talk about kids. Pathways. If you look at Skills USA today, which is a group that aggregates all these skill programs, there's like 2,000 to 2,200 certifiable, monetizable programs that could lead to a skill that you could bring to the open market. Why are we not doing that in high school? Not just doing that in community college or an apprenticeship program, like a journeyman apprenticeship program that a plumbing union or a carpentry union has, and their programs are exquisite. Why don't we actually start in high school, get employers to work with us starting in high school, pay kids for internships in these different employers, the Workforce Employment Act, there's vehicles for all this. The alignment isn't there starting in high school. That's what we should do in terms of all of these programs. In terms of teachers, we should be doing residency programs. We should be doing career ladders. What you saw in New York was we had Al Shanker negotiated a career ladder program for paraprofessionals back in the early 70s. We had that in Washington, D.C. We had that in Baltimore. We are now setting that up, even with all the problems that are happening in Houston. We, through the AFT Innovation Fund, is working with colleges in Houston to set up these career ladder programs for teacher aides and paraprofessionals in Houston to become qualified teachers. This kind of career ladder is really important. That's like an apprentice program. We should also have other apprentice programs. We've had things like Teacher Fellows, Teach for America, things like that. What we really need is programs where teachers feel comfortable and confident before they have a class on their own, but secondarily have mentorship, so that when they're in a class on their own and they're running into a problem, which we all do virtually every single day, the first 3-4 years that we teach, that they have a mentor that they can, they can say, what do I do about this situation? Or will you watch me teach, or can we organize this? So these apprenticeship programs in teaching are really important, but we used to call them residency programs, like in medicine. We need to have real support for teachers so they don't only just get their content area, but they have the practice and the application of teaching, and they get paid during it. Because how else are they going to get paid? Most of us are not born with silver spoons in our mouth. So that's what we're trying to do in terms of teaching. That's what we're trying to do in terms of nursing. So we call it apprenticeship programs, we call it career pathways, we call it residencies. It needs to be a pipeline so you're prepared before you walk into the classroom and you get support during that period of time.
That's great. It sounds like very similar models. I really appreciate your explanation of that. I only have a couple of minutes with you left, but I can't let you go without asking you about Ukraine, because you have been to Ukraine at least 2 times that I'm aware of since the war started.
Right.
What are you doing there? What are you seeing there? And particularly, what are you seeing with respect to kids there?
Right. So our union has been in Ukraine. I did 2 of the 3 trips, and we have had members who have been camp counselors to Polish and Ukrainian kids for the last 2 years as well. And we did and sent a whole lot of generators to the Lviv region in particular for last winter in terms of the horrible bombing where Russia attempted to freeze Ukrainians out, freeze Ukrainians. The bottom line is this. The labor movement and our union in particular, we are big believers of democracy. I'm going to go back to what we said at the beginning, which is for regular folks to have a voice. You got to have a voice in the politics as well as a voice at work. And the only way you have that is in a real democracy where the will of the people is what abides. What Russia attempted to do in modern times is they decided that Ukrainians were less than Putin, and they invaded the country, and they wanted to they wanted to recreate. Putin wants to recreate the USSR, and so the question becomes for Western democracies: what do you do? Do you let us have a redo of what has happened over the course of time, where the powerful take over the less powerful and the rest of us look? Or do you actually fight for a democracy? And that's why the Western democracies are so involved here. It's to actually create a wall that basically, and not a real wall, but to basically say to the people of the world that the people should have the power to determine who they are. That's what democratic values are. And that's why we are involved there. Now, what has happened in terms of kids is that kids have really suffered. A lot of kids have left. A lot of parents are coming back in, but kids have really suffered. And what we are doing, particularly in the international community, is figuring out ways with the unions in Ukraine, we're very close to the teachers union there, to really try to help kids not only survive, but thrive. And what do we do post the war? Because I think all of us now believe that the Ukrainians have actually fought really hard to get to self-determination, to keep their democracy. What do we do to help the kids so that this country thrives and thrives as a democracy? At the end of the day, most people in the world will have more autonomy and freedom in a democracy rather than a fascistic regime. And if we believe in peace and we believe in human dignity, then we have to believe in democracy and we have to fight for it. So whether we're fighting for it here or in Ukraine or in Israel or any place in the world, it is a fight for human dignity and human agency.
Right. And let me just say 2 things. One is unions are absolutely essential to any functioning liberal democracy in the world. It's not just workplace democracy, but they're vital to political democracy in a society. That's why the first thing that autocrats try to do is to crush independent trade unions, and why it's so important to support them around the world. And second, I want to say how not only proud I am, but also impressed I am by your relentless advocacy, not just for kids, not just for teachers, not just for healthcare workers, but for democracy and the values of democracy around the world. You're standing up to some very difficult circumstances, some very difficult people. We didn't get a chance to talk about Israel. I really wanted to do that, but you have a really busy schedule. And so I want to say on behalf of all those people out there who don't have a chance to say this to you directly, that I so appreciate your advocacy for working people and for democracy here in the U.S. and around the world. So, Randi, I appreciate you so much. Thanks for spending time on the Power at Work blog. It was great talking with you, as always, and looking forward to having you back next Back to School tour.
Thank you. Thank you, Seth. Thank you for everything. Thank you.
Great. See you soon. Well, I certainly hope you enjoyed that. The third of our 3 or 4, we're working on a 4th, but the third of our Labor Day blogcasts with President Randi Weingarten. Just a terrific interview, I thought, and she's always exciting to have on and to talk to. Thanks for hanging around. Let me just say, we're eager to have you connect with us. So please subscribe to the blog. You're on the blog right now. When you're done with this blogcast, go to the page that allows you to subscribe. Give us your email. If you do subscribe, we will send you to your inbox the weekly download, which is a collection of a couple of dozen articles, studies, videos, opinion pieces, other things from the web during that week. It's a way for you to keep up to date on the latest labor news. We're also trying to lift up diverse voices from around the country. All different kinds of outlets are represented there: unions, mainstream media, alternative media, all kinds of worker advocacy groups. We lift up all different kinds of stuff, academics. So subscribe, you'll get the weekly download. You'll also get a weekly newsletter that keeps you updated on the content that's on the blog. You can also connect with us on social media. We have a Power at Work page on LinkedIn. We also have a Power at Work page on Facebook. Follow on LinkedIn and on Facebook the Power at Work blog, and you will see our content introduced in those spaces as well. We're also on X, I guess we're calling it now. We're on X at Power at Work blog. It's the former Twitter. You know what I'm talking about. At Power at Work blog on X, at Power at Work blog on Instagram, at Power at Work blog on Threads. We're also on TikTok. You can follow us there. We want to be connected with you. And if you connect with us on social media, you can send us messages through direct messages through those channels. We really would like to hear from you. Delighted that you watched this blogcast. Keep an eye on the blog, because we may have a 4th Labor Day blogcast coming for you later on this month. We certainly have a lot of fantastic content on the blog right now. Go look through the blog and find the stuff that you're most interested in. There's something for everybody who cares about workers and worker power and unions. Really appreciate your support of the Power at Work blog, and we will see you on the blog again very soon.